Hi, this is Tony again. Today, I want to talk to you about Tim Walz, the governor for Minnesota. He is currently running as the vice president candidate on the Democratic ticket with Kamala Harris as the presidential candidate. So who is Tim Walz? What is his background and what are some of his latest accomplishments as governor of the state of Minnesota? Walz spent his honeymoon in China and has taken over 30 trips to China during his government service. Many are questioning why he took so many trips to China, and does this mean that he is coordinating activities with their government? At this point in time, we don't know, but it does create some concern as to where his loyalty lies. Recently, Walz has come under scrutiny for his time in the National Guard. Walz had been claiming that he served as a command sergeant major, the highest-ranking enlisted position in the service. He had used this claim to win election as a representative to the U.S. House and during his campaigns as governor. But what really caused an issue for him was that he claimed that he fought with his unit in the Iraq War. Recently, Walz was discredited because it was proven that he retired before his unit went overseas. Although Walz was the command sergeant major of his unit, he did not retire with that rank. Walz had been using this fake story to further his political career. Many servicemen spoke out against Walz due to this stolen valor issue. However, after he was selected as the Democrat vice presidential candidate, Democrats across the nation and the national media have swiftly fallen for what they are calling Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's Midwest dad persona, sharing videos of him working on a car, going on a roller coaster with his daughter at the state fair, signing a bill renaming a street in Prince's honor in purple ink. But he's also got a long record of liberal accomplishments as governor. Walz's first term was largely defined by the gridlock of divided government and crisis management in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the aftermath of the police murder of George Floyd. Minnesotans remember that it was Walz who stood by and watched the riots which set fire to portions of downtown and watched a police station burn. It was Walz and his wife who commented that they opened their windows to smell the burning fire during the riots. Walz was also the person who forced businesses to close during the COVID-19 pandemic while many businesses in the rest of the nation remained open. It was Walz who threw businessmen in jail who defied these close-down orders because their business was failing due to the shutdown. Certainly, these are a couple of memories that many Minnesotans have of Walz's initial term in office. But once Democrats swept control of state government in the 2022 elections with Walz at the top of the ticket, they passed one of the most progressive agendas in the nation's recent history with just a single-seat Senate majority. Walz represented a Republican-leaning district in the U.S. House and was widely seen as the more centrist of the two leading Democratic candidates for governor, but he's become a champion of progressive policy as governor. With few exceptions, Walz supported whatever the Democratic majorities in the State House and Senate could muster the votes to pass. Those bills, ranging from protecting abortion access to speeding up energy permitting to increasing protections against wage theft, have excited the nation's Democratic base, which is beginning to learn about the trifecta's work over the past 2 years. Here's a look at where Walz, now Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate, stands on the issues, based on the bills he's signed. It also should give you an indication of where Kamala Harris stands on these issues. Among the first bills Walz signed after Democrats took control of the legislature was the Protect Reproductive Options Act, guaranteeing that every individual has a fundamental right to make autonomous decisions about the individual's own reproductive health. The law fulfilled a campaign promise that helped Democrats win control of state government after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, allowing states across the South and Midwest to enact draconian restrictions on abortion. The message that we're sending Minnesota today is very clear. Your rights are protected in the state. You have the right to make your own decisions about your health, your family and your life, Walz said during a ceremonial bill signing in January 2023. Democrats then passed a SHIELD law, aimed at protecting women who travel to Minnesota for abortions by prohibiting state courts, law enforcement and healthcare providers from cooperating with authorities outside the state. Finally, Democrats eliminated virtually all restrictions on abortion, many of which had already been deemed unconstitutional, including those abortions after the first trimester be performed in a hospital or abortion facility, that both parents of minors be notified and that the State Department of Health keep data on abortions. In addition, they approved abortions up to and including birth. This law is now the most liberal abortion rule in the country. Perhaps the most popular bill Walz signed into law provides free school breakfast and lunch to all kids at eligible schools, regardless of income. The bill being signed at a Minneapolis school created the now ubiquitous image of a mob of schoolchildren embracing Walz as he laughed. This picture is being used by the media as an example of what Minnesotans feel about Walz. The 2023 legislature also boosted K-12 education spending by $2.3 billion and early childhood education by $300 million. Although school districts complained much of the new funding went to cover new mandates. Among those mandates was the READ Act, which requires school districts to use evidence-based practices to teach reading. School districts must also provide free menstrual products to students. This includes providing tampons in boys' bathrooms. Many of Walz's opponents now call him Tampon Tim, as a result of this new mandate. One of the more controversial policies Walz signed into law banned school police officers from using prone, e.g., face down, restraints on students, which created a mini-political crisis when some police departments pulled their officers from schools. Walz said he doesn't support the use of face-down holds but also signed the bill repealing the ban. Walz also signed a bill providing free college tuition for the University of Minnesota and Minnesota State campuses, for families with income of $80,000 or less. For Walz, a former teacher, achieving a Minnesota Miracle 2.0 inches would define his legacy as governor. But the state's above-average achievement has sunk closer to average during his tenure, while racial disparities, among the worst in the nation, have persisted. In 2015, the Annie E. Casey Foundation ranked the state 6th overall in the U.S. on education quality. By 2024, Minnesota had fallen to 19th place. Increased funding for schools, science-based reading instruction requirements and free universal meals will likely take years to yield results, and I suspect that Minnesota's rank will continue to decline. Recent history says that more funding does not yield better education. It yields more courses, more administrators and more mandates. Walz was criticized by Republicans for keeping schools shuttered longer than in many Republican-led states. The long periods of remote learning damaged the academic and social-emotional progress of many children, but Walz and his allies said the risk to staff and families was too great. Walz has been a great champion for the teachers' unions in this regard. A federal program, administered by the State Department of Education, designed to feed hungry children when schools and daycares closed, became the source of a massive fraud during Walz's service, with over $250 million gone missing. The U.S. Attorney has convicted nearly 24 people of the 70 who have been charged, in what is the biggest pandemic relief fraud in the nation. Walz signed into law one of the most significant pro-worker agendas in state history in 2023, including paid sick leave and a state-run paid family and medical leave program providing up to 20 weeks of leave in a single year. Democrats banned non-compete agreements, banned anti-union captive audience meetings, expanded unemployment benefits to hourly school workers who are off during the summer, made general contractors liable for wage theft by their subcontractors, and raised workplace safety standards at meatpacking plants and Amazon and other big warehouses. The state also established a nation-leading nursing home workforce standards board with the power to set wages across the industry. Walz has also signed massive infrastructure spending packages, known as bonding bills, including a $2.6 billion package in 2023 funding many union construction jobs repairing roads, bridges and other critical infrastructure. Walz broke with his allies in the labor movement on two significant occasions that year, however. Walz insisted on a carve-out for Mayo Clinic from two bills aimed at increasing nurse staffing levels and slowing the rise of healthcare costs, after the healthcare giant, and largest private employer in the state, threatened to move billions in future investments out of state. Both bills were gutted. The president of the Minnesota Nurses Association, the union advocating for the staffing bill, called it a betrayal. Walz also issued the only veto of his tenure on a bill setting minimum pay rates for Uber and Lyft drivers and granting them greater protections from being unfairly deactivated after Uber said it may leave the state. Instead, he created a task force on driver pay and labor standards, which informed a bill he did sign earlier this year. 100% of Minnesota's energy must come from carbon-free sources by 2040 under a bill Walz signed into law in early 2023, putting the state on one of the most aggressive timelines to shift away from fossil fuels. He also signed a bill to speed up permitting for new energy projects. While celebrated by environmentalists at the time, his administration has recently earned their ire by advocating for the carbon-free definition to include burning wood and trash for energy, since those sources will emit carbon dioxide whether burned for electricity or left to decompose. Walz also moved aggressively to curb greenhouse gas emissions by making Minnesota the first state in the Midwest to adopt California's clean car standards. The standards, which require car dealers to offer more hybrid and electric vehicles, are set to take effect next year after surviving a lengthy legal battle. Along with clean car standards, Walz approved additional tax credits to bring down the cost of electric cars and e-bikes. Early in his first term, Walz continued a legal challenge from his predecessor's administration to Enbridge's Line 3 replacement pipeline. Enbridge ultimately completed the new oil pipeline despite legal challenges and protests by some native tribes and environmental activists, including outside the governor's residence. Walz faced harsh criticism from those groups for not using executive power to halt construction. Environmentalists have also been disappointed that Walz hasn't tried to stop plans for copper sulfide mining near the Boundary Waters and in the St. Louis River watershed that feeds into Lake Superior. His administration has defended state permits for Polymet's proposed mine near Babbitt and allowed Twin Metals to conduct drilling tests on state land near the Boundary Waters. The Biden administration essentially put a 20-year moratorium on the Twin Metals proposal, however, by removing 225,000 acres near the protected wilderness from the federal mining leasing program. Those projects are supported by trade unions, which has put competing pressure on Walz from two important constituencies. Like many Democratic governors, Walz put in place a stay-at-home order at the beginning of the pandemic, and later an indoor mask mandate and restrictions on public events at the urging of public health authorities and institutions like the Mayo Clinic. Walz enlisted former Governor Tim Pawlenty, the last Republican to win statewide office in Minnesota, in a public show of their COVID-19 vaccination. He required state workers to be vaccinated before they could return to the workplace. The pandemic decisions were polarizing and at times faced legal challenges. By the time the worst of the pandemic was over, Minnesota had lower COVID-19 death rates than most other states. Walz spent his first term under divided government fruitlessly pushing for expansion of Minnesota Care, Minnesota's health insurance program for the working poor. With Democrats in power, Walz signed a bill moving the state toward establishing a public option that allows all residents without employer-subsidized health insurance to buy into Minnesota Care. The earliest that could begin is 2027, and lawmakers must still receive federal approval and find a way to fund the new social benefit. In the first year of his second term, Walz signed a bill to expand public health insurance access to the more than 40,000 undocumented people estimated to live in Minnesota who meet the income requirements of Minnesota Care beginning as soon as next year. This is a bill that Kamala Harris championed during her time in the Senate. Walz also signed a bill making Minnesota a refuge for people seeking gender-affirming care. Democrats duped Republicans into legalizing low-dose THC edibles and drinks in 2022. And then came back for full legalization after taking both chambers in the election that year. Walz ran on legalization in 2018, so this was a promise kept. The legalization rollout has been a little rocky. Walz's first choice to lead the Office of Cannabis Management was forced to step aside after media reports that she had been selling THC products with more THC than is legally allowed, had tax liens and unpaid debts. The administration has still yet to name a permanent replacement. The law includes an expungement mechanism to help people clear their records of marijuana convictions. It also favors communities hardest hit by prohibition by giving them a head start on obtaining a license to open a marijuana dispensary. Retail sales are expected sometime next spring, according to the MinPost publication. The aftermath of the police murder of George Floyd in 2020 presented one of the greatest political and governing challenges of Walz's career. The widespread destruction of the riots, which followed decades of police abuses, created a lasting liability for him. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey blamed Walz for hesitating to call in the National Guard while the city burned, while Walz's office said the city did not provide enough detailed information for them to deploy the National Guard until the afternoon of May 28, after 3 nights of protests and rioting. At the time, Walz also faced pressure to quickly pass police reforms by those far to the left of him championing "Defund the police," a slogan that continues to haunt mainstream Democrats. Walz did sign a bipartisan bill in 2020 with policing changes, including a ban on certain chokeholds, a ban on warrior-style training for police officers and residency incentives for police officers to live in the city they patrol. Later, with control of state government, Democrats passed a more sweeping package of changes to policing and criminal justice broadly. Walz signed a bill changing the state's standard for deadly force, saying it shall be exercised judiciously and with respect for human rights and dignity and for the sanctity of every human life. Walz also signed a bill banning cops from entering homes without knocking first, with limited exceptions, in response to the 2022 police killing Amir Locke, a young black man not suspected of any crime. He also signed off on a massive overhaul of the state's prison system, making it more rehabilitative and less punitive in an effort to reduce recidivism. It includes earned release, in which prisoners can get out earlier and shorten their community supervision time if they participate in rehabilitation programs. Now, prisoners can get out when half their sentence has been served if they complete programs and behave well. Republicans called it a get-out-of-jail-free bill. Walz also signed legislation that limits probation to 5 years for most felonies, except for homicides and sex crimes, made phone calls free for prisoners, legalizes possession of drug paraphernalia, made it easier for people to expunge non-violent crimes from their records, made it easier to get clemency, and banned people involved in hate or extremists groups from being licensed as police officers. While governor, the state gave $300 million to cities, counties and tribal governments to spend on law enforcement as they see fit and invested $70 million in community violence prevention grants for victim services, prison re-entry, homelessness assistance, restorative justice, violence interruption and juvenile diversion. Undocumented Minnesotans can now get a driver's license after Walz signed a bill in early 2023. Last year Walz signed legislation restoring voting rights to felons who are no longer imprisoned. The law was upheld this week in the face of a legal challenge. The bill restored the right to vote to over 50,000 Minnesotans who have completed their sentences but remain on probation or parole. Prior to that, they had to wait until they were out from under the government's control and had paid their fines and restitution. Given Minnesota's lengthy probation, that could add up to years. Walz also signed the Democracy for the People Act, which aims to make casting a ballot easier. The law includes automatic voter registration, allows 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register to vote, and creates a permanent mail voting list, meaning voters can be automatically sent a mail ballot for every election, without having to apply for one. This practice rapidly expands the ability of the political parties to cheat. Other new election laws Walz signed include a requirement that voting instructions and sample ballots be translated into languages other than English in certain districts, protections for election workers from intimidation or interference, a ban on tampering with voting equipment, ballot boxes and lists of registered voters, and an extension of the right to leave work in order to vote to include the 46 days of early voting. The legislature passed and Walz signed a 1% sales tax increase in the 7-county Twin Cities metro area, with 75% dedicated to transportation and 0.25% for housing. It was a major victory for Democrats, who had long sought dedicated funding sources for public transportation and affordable housing. But the tax hike, passed when the legislature had a $17.5 billion surplus, drew outrage from Republicans. Walz also signed a bill tying the state's gas tax to inflation, capped at 3%, which was a politically risky decision as consumers' budgets were battered by high gas prices and high inflation. In addition to tax increases, Walz and his Democratic colleagues exempted Social Security income from taxes for joint filers earning less than $100,000 a year. They also championed tax credits for low-income families, and the state earned the recognition of having the most equitable tax system in the country, according to the left-leaning Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. Walz signed one of the nation's largest child tax credits, which is steeply graduated, granting $1,750 per child for low-income Minnesotans. It begins to phase out for married filers who make $35,000 annually and $29,500 for single taxpayers. Walz also signed a bill expanding the Working Family Credit, which is the state equivalent of the federal Earned Income Tax Credit. The legislature passed and Walz signed a one-time tax rebate of $261,300, depending on family size, in what became colloquially known as a Timmy Stimmy. The former renter's tax credit has become an income tax credit, which is expected to sharply increase the number of people who claim it. Even as legislators pushed for a novel tax increase on corporations' international revenue, as well as a fifth income tax tier, Walz let those proposals die on the vine. The perception going into the 2018 campaign for governor that Walz was a moderate was due in large part to his position on guns. He grew up around guns, was a skilled marksman during his military career, hunts pheasants and had long been endorsed by the NRA. That changed after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School massacre in Parkland, Florida, which also coincided with Walz's campaign to win the Democratic farmer labor endorsement that spring. "The world's changed. I've changed," he said at the time. Since then, he signed bills requiring background checks for all private gun sales, allowing a judge to temporarily take a person's guns if they are deemed a threat to themselves or others, e.g., a red flag law, and increasing the penalty for straw purchases of guns, as when a person buys guns for the express purpose of helping someone get a gun when they are not legally allowed to. That law passed in the wake of the killing of 3 first responders by a gunman alleged to have used a firearm obtained via a straw purchase. Minnesota lawmakers increased the state's spending on housing about ninefold with a $1 billion spending package, paid for with part of the $17.5 billion surplus in 2023, to increase affordable housing, prevent homelessness, expand homeownership opportunities, and provide rental assistance to thousands of households. A bipartisan group of lawmakers aimed to increase housing construction by overriding local zoning laws that restrict development and economic inclusion. Most of those proposals failed to get enough support, however, although Walz did sign a bill ending an environmental lawsuit against Minneapolis over its pro-density 2040 plan. Wow! This is quite a list of accomplishments. Many of these are used by Walz supporters to indicate why he would make a good vice president. However, these same accomplishments are a concern for Walz's opponents because they represent some of the most radical legislation passed in the last couple of years. Opponents suggest that Walz's record is a good indication of what the Harris-Walz ticket hopes to do if they are elected. Based upon her speeches and interviews in recent years, Kamala Harris is to the left of Bernie Sanders on most issues, which would indicate she is to the left of Walz on many issues. Based upon their records, this team would be the most liberal team ever put forth as a team to run the country. I hope this gives you a better idea of who Walz is and what his accomplishments were as governor of Minnesota. Videos for the other presidential and vice presidential candidates will soon be available at the Nehemiah Reset website. Nehemiah Reset doesn't endorse any of these candidates and only provides information on the candidates based upon those items that can be found in public records. Voters should do more research on all candidates that are running for public office. To study more about today's cultural issues, watch some of our other videos. Nehemiah Reset's mission is to assist Christians in developing a biblical worldview as it pertains to relevant cultural and biblical issues. We seek to inform Christ's followers, equip them, and mobilize them into action to vote for their biblical values and to actively engage the culture. We are also committed to help Christians and non-believers develop a better biblical view. Nehemiah Reset produces videos and ebooks to assist members of the church in developing a biblical worldview when it comes to cultural issues. We produce videos on key topics like public school indoctrination, the woke agenda, sex education, equity and inclusion, climate change, immigration, religious freedom, and much, much more. To learn more about Nehemiah Reset or to watch some of our videos about the culture and to build your biblical worldview, go to our website at nehemiahreset.org or our rumble.com channel. Thanks for watching and have a great day.
Thank you for watching this video from Nehemiah Reset. We hope you found it informative and helpful. Our mission is to assist Christians in developing a biblical worldview as it pertains to relevant cultural issues. We seek to inform Christ's followers, equip them, and mobilize them into action to vote for their biblical values and to actively engage the culture. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our Rumble, YouTube and Facebook channels. You can also visit our website at nehemiahreset.org to learn more about our vision, our resources, and our upcoming events. Thank you for your support and God bless you.